Hello, everyone, and how are you today? So, we are back for another episode of the Wired for Success podcast. Today, we are continuing in talking about the Blackburn story. Do you remember what we spoke about? We were talking about the cultural differences and how it affects parenting. How it affects parenting in terms of the way we view society, the way we view our children, the way we view our family, but also the way it can create clashes in terms of culture or in terms of culture. So I am Patience Modevi, and with me today is my superb colleague Steve Costello, and we are the fantastic duo of Wired for Success. And we are here for you, for parents, and to support teenagers and parents having great relationships and moving forward. So, so if you have followed on to the Blackburn story, which was a story that Steve um, taught us, you would know that it was about a father who was having certain views on how, first of all, his son should act uh, in terms of his own manhood, and also the way his daughter should act. Two different view from one same person, two different culture coming in. The religious culture, as in the fact that he was Muslim, from a Muslim religion, and also from an Asian community. So there's two, and then when you combine with being in England.
Yeah, it's kind of a complicated story, but not. So we can simplify it. And as you were talking just now, Patience, and I got an image of my mum in my head, and my mum of when I was quite small. I don't know how old I would be, but maybe 12 years old or even younger than that. And she had some very clear ways of thinking. And those ways of thinking were very much based on her experiences of childhood, adolescence, her experiences with her own parents, her experience with the fact that her dad was in the Navy during the Second World War. So there was all kinds of experiences that she'd gone through that I didn't. But she brought them all forward and tried to apply many of them to me. Some of them worked, some of them did not work. Some of them were so far removed from what I was seeing in my world at that time that they were never going to work. So that ended up in some conflict. I also remember thinking that on a few occasions that some of the messages she was putting out to me were a little bit mixed. So maybe she wasn't entirely sold on her history that she brought forward. Maybe she was beginning to question some of that herself. So there was some mixed messages. I love my mum, by the way, so I'm not having a go at her. I'm just saying, this is how it looked when I was a child. I also lived close to a big Asian community and a big Afro-Caribbean community. So I had lots of friends from those communities, and their experience was not the same as mine. Their parents had come from very different places, very different parts of the world, in fact, not just different places within the UK, but they come from all over the world. So they come into the UK with all kinds of expectations about their cultures. And then suddenly they're confronted with this UK culture thing that they're trying to fit into. And that in itself must have been complicated. How did those kids feel who were naturally fitting in because they were born in the UK? So they were part of the UK scene, as it were. but yet their parents were coming from somewhere else. So we've got all this fantastically rich mixture of feelings and attitudes and all kinds of positive things. But we also had some negative stuff as well.
Yeah.
There was some, I'll use the phrase loosely, there were some gangs of young people from some of these cultural groups. And it was always advised that we didn't go near these gangs because it would end up badly for
Yeah.
us, so we would avoid certain gangs. And that was difficult in itself. So that, and there's a lot of cultural stuff went on because of that. But the biggest thing that I remember clearly about all this cultural stuff was assumptions. We all made assumptions about one another's culture, and those assumptions were frequently wrong.
Yes.
They were misunderstood, misguided, and so on and so forth. So, what can we do about all of this stuff? The fact that the Muslim culture in the Asian community in the Blackburn story, part of it believed that certain things were okay and certain things were not okay. We can't really do much about that. We can challenge it, but we can't really change it. So, what can we do? How can we help young people and their parents make sense of all of this richness that's around us? The good, the bad, and the indifferent. How can we help everybody to make sense of all this?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
It's such a big question, and also I love the fact that the way you depicted this in terms of like where people came from, and then they came to England, and how they had to also assimilate the English culture into the way they were feeling. Plus, also people who are British, who were British at the time, who had a certain idea of what life should be and how things should be, and then seeing people a little bit like as a threat, to be honest. So not necessarily as people coming to add some benefit, but also like as a threat. And the if you look at it as a parent, we always see things as a threat for our children. We see everything as a threat in the house. Don't touch this, don't go there, don't do this. If you do this, this will happen. This is the message that often parents will share with their children. So, as you were asking this question, how can we stop, or what can we do to kind of like create much more of an harmony? I think first of all is understanding the cultures that we are in, understanding where we are. The reason why I say that is I think it will reflect for you the way it reflects for me, because you are in France. So you are an English person in France, and I'm a French person in England. And when I came here, I had to adapt some of my ways because it's not the same way. So, something really simple, yeah? Like in France, when I left France, which was in the early 2000s, um, it was basically an idea that on the Sunday, everything is closed. Maybe you have the bakery open, people are going to church, so you have the florist, florist, like things like this. And you have maybe those big shops which sell like furniture, where people go in the afternoon to look at new furniture they want for their house. So there was all this idea that on Sunday it was a family day. You don't call people, you don't call to your friends on those days, because they are with their family, and most of the time we'll be visiting aunties and uncles and etc. So it was not a day of going for shopping. And in the evening, in a weekday, in the evening, everything was shut down by 8 o'clock. So by 8 o'clock, you didn't have salt or you didn't have eggs. You would go to your neighbor, knock on the door, and get what you needed to get him. So I came to England, and all of a sudden, everything is open. I mean, London, the life never stops. Everything is going round the clock. So I could wake up at 5 o'clock and want to make myself an omelette. I don't have eggs. I can quickly go out, buy some eggs, and come back. So all of this is something that I had to adapt on. And I will tell you how I realized I was adapting on it is when I went back to France the first time. And I got used to the way of the English way, the London way, and realized that no, everything was closed. I was lost. I was completely lost. And then when I went to visit my family in the south of France, it was worse because in the south of France, they have the siesta, and the siesta lasts for how many hours during the day? So I was again lost. Can you imagine a French person lost in their own country?
Yeah.
So, so, so I'm telling you this story just in a way of showing that we need to adapt. But when we need to adapt, we need to also allow our children to also get this adaptation. I believe that everything is through communication. So we need to communicate with our children, and communicate is both ways, so two ways. So we can start by asking questions about how do they feel in this society? Where do they feel they fit in? It might be obvious for you, but it might not be obvious for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's crucially important. Just on the south of France, so I'm in the south of France. It's not changed. I needed to buy something from a DIY store last week, and I went to get in the car at about 15 minutes to 12 in the morning, and realized that I couldn't get there before 12 o'clock. So there was no point going because it was going to be closed for a couple of hours. But
Yes.
yeah, you got to get used to
And
it.
I heard this is worse in some places in Spain as well, you know.
Yeah,
So it looks like the more you
yeah,
go to down the south, the more they have
yeah,
a bigger
absolutely.
siesta.
Yeah. So I think the whole point is asking about how everybody feels is really important.
Yes.
So a good, for example, I can use my own children. We came to live in France in 2013. Um, and at the time, our eldest child didn't come with us. She was in university in the UK. But the others came with us. So the eldest at that time was Yuri. He was 15, I think. Yes, he was. He was about 15. Um, so for a 15-year-old to suddenly arrive in the south of France from the southwest of England, near to Plymouth, was kind of a big deal. You
Yeah.
know, not only did he suddenly not have friends around him, okay, he still had those friends via Snapchat and Facebook and so on and so forth, but he had to fit into a whole new world. Not only was the language different,
Mhm.
but the culture was different, the style was different. Patience was just talked about some of those differences. Okay, we make light of them and they're quite fun.
Yeah.
You know, that, for example, this coming Monday is a public holiday.
So,
All the shops will be closed, nothing will be open.
yeah.
And everybody goes to everybody's house. You know, we go, but we're doing the same.
Yeah.
Some of our kids are coming to be with us for the weekend because it's a holiday weekend, you know, which is nice, and that's what everybody does, which is really cool. But it's very different to what our kids were used to. The school system's different. The
Mm.
way that kids hang out is different, believe it or not.
Yeah.
There are big differences in that. So fitting into all of that was quite challenging. One of our sons, we have two sons, one of our sons kind of stepped back from fitting in to his peer group when he got to France. Not because he was shy, not because he didn't like them, but he didn't feel it. He didn't feel that he could fit into that way of being. Now he's found his niche, as it were. But he's kind of on the edge of French society, living in France, when he's got a circle of friends and so on, but he's not really part of the culture. He's not part of the British culture either. He's kind of somewhere in between, but that's him. But that's what he's chosen.
Mm,
He's chosen to see what's going on around him and to adapt. We've always asked the kids since we came here, how do you all feel? How are you getting on? How are you getting on with friendship groups, with peer groups, with school groups, all those things? And by asking those questions gives them the freedom to think. They're used to us asking the questions. And I think that's a crucial point to make. They're used to us asking the questions because it's what we do. If our kids are not used to us asking questions, they won't find that easy to manage in the
mm,
beginning. Now, that sounds a little bit simplistic, but let's use talking about sex. We just recently had some fairly big conversations about sex with one of our own children. And she
mm,
found that very difficult because the conversation was new to her, because previously it was rather light, but now she's at the age where the conversation has taken on a kind of a different level. And she found that initially very difficult because her mum and her dad were quite open to talking about the things that she needed to talk about. So there's another key word, openness. We need to be open. I think going back to culture in the UK, the Blackburn story, the father that I spoke to was not open to fitting into UK culture. That was the way he was, and that's his thing. I couldn't do anything to change that, but he wasn't open to that. But yet, I've known many young people that have come from Asian culture, for example, or Afro Caribbean, who have only wanted to be part of life.
mm.
Therefore, they want to fit into the culture. So that's when, there may be differences between them and their parents. So, how do we manage those differences? Do the parents just need to say, okay, I'm here, we've got to put up with it? What do the parents need to do? That's perhaps a difficult question to answer, and the answer is not going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah.
But we need
Um,
to enable our young people to be who they're supposed to be, and it's not up to us to tell them that.
it's true. And I think something as well is really important. So openness into our conversation is really important. And also, I guess, truth and authenticity. So, if I'm able to be authentic and say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. I might be your parent, I might be your mom, your dad, but I don't have all the answers. My answers are also not your answers. So we have to allow our young people to find their own answers, like what Steve was saying about one of his son who was somewhere in between, who is still somehow somewhere in between, and that's fine because that's his truth. That's where he feels more comfortable. So when the idea, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the culture. Like, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to try and fit this in. So when I look into the African culture, there's a lot of this idea that you need to be a good girl, you need to be a good child, a good boy, someone who is good academically, someone who is good in front of everybody, traditionally does everything. So, for example, when people come to visit, you need to be able to bow down and serve the person and be the person that does not talk and listens and talk only when you ask to talk. There's all these kind of like um boundaries and things that you should be doing to show that you are this good person, which could be in good in a way, it could be beneficial, but at the same time is also fake. You are not, this is not what you are. You are only doing this to show a certain a side of yourself. And in certain ways we all do it. We do it at work. When we go to work, we do it at school. We show a certain image because that's what asked of us. But if we were to live in our truth and authenticity, wouldn't we really be able to know where we stand? So, for example, for a long time, I had this idea that I was French, I was French, I was French, I was French, I was French. And then came this idea of like, oh, I'm African. I'm actually French African. I'm from Togo, I'm from Ghana. Where do I lie? This is where, and then you add other things that comes into the equation, and you're thinking, "Ooh, who am I?" And at that time, often what young people will do is they will project on what their parents expect of them. But what if you were to
Yeah.
allow your child to be in their own truth and their authenticity? What would happen then?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. I think I've told this story in a previous episode. As you said, patients were a bit short on time. So when I was younger, when I was coming up to leaving school, it was expected that I go to work in local industry as an
Mm,
apprentice, usually an apprentice engineer, because I was well paid. So you do that, you pass your apprenticeship, then you find somebody, you fall in love, you get married, you buy a house, or you buy a house, you get married. I don't know which way around that was supposed to work, but anyway,
you
that's
do
what you
this.
did. You did all that stuff. That was expected. I, however, said, actually, I'm leaving my great job after 5 years. I said, I'm leaving now, I'm going traveling. So I went abroad, I traveled all over the place. But that created a massive amount of friction.
Mm,
That the authentic me, the real me, the one who wanted to live my truth, needed to travel. He needed to learn about other cultures and all kinds of stuff. It wasn't just about seeing the sights. But that was difficult for my parents to comprehend
yeah,
because they came from a place where you just didn't do that.
yeah.
So it was hard, and we got over it. We worked it out. But we need to enable young people to live their truth, to be authentic, to be who they're supposed to be. And what happens when we're not who we're supposed to be? What ultimately happens? Somewhere along the way, we crash and burn.
Mm,
I know that's a little bit of a cliche, the crash and burn thing, but that does happen.
it does.
Yeah.
It does. We crash and burn because we are not living our true desire, our true um, what is coming in us. So we are unique in it. In I think this is something that is important to understand. Everyone is unique. How do you show your unique side of yourself? How do you make it show? How do you live it? You can't live it if you are living in someone else's shadow. Unfortunately, this is what happens a lot, and especially when we bring cultural differences into parenting.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, we've been here again. We've gone over the time again, but I'm sure nobody minds. Let us know if you do, and we will respond. We will be back again next week. Take care, and we will speak to you soon.
Bye.